All right, so let me tell you a little bit about my leadership journey. I spent 6 years on submarines, so I was in the military, and that's definitely more of an authority environment than leadership. And but I did have some mentors who really exemplified leadership. So we'll talk about the difference between that. Fast forward a few years, I went to undergrad and graduate school, and then I ended up at Maryland DNR, and it had maybe 35 people in my group. And I was asked to do a leadership training called the Water Resources Leadership Institute. And I said no, and I said no multiple years. I was being asked by the number 2 person at Maryland DNR, and I was still saying no because I was too busy to do anything, and I thought we were pretty effective the way we were. So I ended up in year 5 of this program. It was the last cohort that ran by the University of Maryland School of Government. And it really opened my eyes to leadership. And I kind of realized some of the failings that I had. Some things I did well, but I was able to start on the journey. Then I got asked to do a National Conservation Leadership Institute gig. And I said yes, willingly. And one of the unexpected things for me from that was that I determined that I wanted to share this leadership stuff. So that's kind of what I've been doing a lot of. It's my favorite thing to do. So it was an easy topic choice tonight. Anyway, let's see. Why am I not advancing? There we go. Okay. So leadership, if you think about it, it's kind of like basketball. You can't be a good basketball player by just reading a book about basketball. Obviously, it takes practice and then game conditions, right? And think of it the same way with leadership. You really have to be out there trying things and kind of building your toolbox so that you get better and better. And every one of us has exercised leadership in our lifetime many times. So we all have things that we do well, and things maybe that we could improve on. But we all have a starting point. I guess that's the point, and we can all get better. So I chose this slide because I think kind of it, first of all, it relates to climate, I think, pretty nicely. But you think about what leadership is, people can shy away from it because it's a little risky, right? And the root word of leadership is leaf, and that means to go forth and die. And of course, none of us wants to go forth and die. What we want is really extraordinary results without having to put in the risk. But leadership carries risk. You can be smart about it, but there's no way around it. There's some risk. So yeah. And I think a great definition of leadership is mobilizing people to address the problems that they would rather avoid. And I chose this Black Lives Matter slide because the pushback from folks in authority was and still is, things are changing. It's not that bad. You guys just need to go back to your houses. And of course, that's not really the case, but we don't like this disruption thing, so go away. So that kind of gets into the leadership realm. And, if we want to compare leadership and authority, leadership is a couple of things, but authority is direction, protection, and order, 3 different things. And leadership is kind of just the opposite. Because you're going into places, you're working on problems that are hard, so you kind of don't know, how it's going to come out. And authority is kind of more management, and the term manage in French, the root of that is to bind hands together. So literally, if you're managing things, you are constraining what people can do. And leadership is much more of an empowering and releasing those hands so that they can be creative. And how are they related? They are related. So if you think of a work situation where you kind of have your boundaries, you kind of know what your scope is, and something outside of that, we generally kind of tend to know that there's a line. And if we go too far outside that line, we can get shut down. Somewhere on the edge, you can probably get away with it. So, there's various ways of kind of sensing when your boss is uncomfortable with you or whatever, depending on your relationship. But that's kind of the schematic for leadership, is outside that normal scope of authority. And here's one thing that I hope you'll ponder. And the first time I heard it, it just kind of struck me not very well. There's no such thing as a leader, only people exercising leadership. And kind of the follow-ons from that are that exercising leadership doesn't matter what position you have. Greta Thunberg has no formal authority, but certainly is exercising lots and lots of leadership. And if you think about work situations, government, and so forth, things like promotions tend to silence people. You don't want to bite the hand that feeds you. So we have this inherent kind of feedback system that really keeps the status quo and keeps you within that scope from that last slide I just showed you. And here's another thing: top authority figures rarely exercise leadership. Why is that? Partly because if you exercise leadership, it's pretty much always an experiment. You don't really know how it's going to come out. You get better over time, but working on hard problems, there's not a guarantee that your answer is going to be right. And so if you're seen as incompetent, your group could toss you out. And that kind of goes back to our, some of you remember the ancient brain talk that I gave a few months ago. So yeah, that being seen as is potentially incompetent, that's a pretty big deal too. But we follow authority. We're trained to follow authority from when we're young, right? You have to listen to your parents, listen to your teacher, always obey the police, and on and on and on. So that kind of status quo thing is kind of built into the system. And there are characteristics, if you think about, who would stand up and if I had a tall white man and a short black woman in the same space and said, which one, should be in charge here, many people would go for the tall old white person because we're kind of inherently biased that way. And so how do we kind of get around that? We have to consciously think about how we confer our authority to act, right? And that authorization thing is pretty important. So the authorization can be kind of formal, but it can also be informal as well. And it's what we give people to act. So, and then the process for leadership is really three things. You see something going on, observation, then you think about what's happening, you're interpreting it, and then you decide to intervene or not. And all of us, every day, we're observing things and we're interpreting things, but that intervention piece becomes more of an issue. How often do we intervene? And why, what are the conditions we do or don't? So sometimes it's just, we don't have the energy, right? And I think all of us in the climate fight, some days we just feel burned out, don't want to take on something else. And then sometimes people just don't have a strong enough sense of purpose, so they have apathy. And then many people don't think that they're good enough, so they haven't given themselves the reputation to exercise leadership. They haven't given themselves agency. And then another thing that holds people back is the risk of failure. And what could happen to me if I screw up? And then sometimes the other people will influence you to back off and not step up for various reasons. I could think of a million of them, but I want to give everybody time to chew on this a little bit. And then I'll give you an example. For me, we don't risk things that are important. My wife had an MS diagnosis for about 10 years. She doesn't anymore. It's just seemed to have faded. But I could only push things so far at work because the health insurance, the coverage for injections and all that was enormously important. So that certainly held back what I was willing to, lay down and stand up and use my voice. I never got fired. I was probably on the edge a few times, but anyway, everyone has those sorts of things. And sometimes it's just the fact that you're employed keeps you from exercising leadership. And that holds us back. When do we choose to lead? Well, when we care deeply about something, that's a really important thing. Having the confidence to lead, and that's a couple things. One is the reputation you give yourself, and that's self-esteem. Self-efficacy is another, and that's kind of the reputation or the belief that you could succeed in a situation, right? And then you got to believe that you could actually make it be possible, finding a solution. And things like climate, boy, that's kind of hard, isn't it? Because, boy, we don't know exactly what the right answers are. There's so many different things that have to go on all at one time. And some of us kind of hold back because we want to do just the perfect thing, and rather than good things that will move us toward a result that we need. And then sometimes we'll accept any risks or consequences because we care deeply enough about the issue. I'll give you one quick example with my wife. Years ago, my daughter, our middle child, had a pretty severe allergy to cigarettes, smoke, and she played soccer. And so she was at a travel tournament. Somebody lit up a cigarette like 300 or 400 feet away from her, and smoking wasn't allowed, but wasn't enforced. So she had to leave the game and then go to the emergency room to save her life. And so that stimulated my wife to go to the county commissioners and basically lay down the law that there would be no smoking permitted, that it would be enforced. And there was nothing, when she said she was going to do it, I knew she would succeed. There was not a doubt in my mind. She would do everything necessary to protect her child. So that was, caring deeply about an issue. So this is old George Washington crossing the Delaware River around the head of tide in Trenton. And, it was a really bold move, but his army was starving to death, and he was in desperate straits. So desperation forced him to kind of take this very unexpected trip across the river. And so as I think about climate change and the way things are ramping up, and some days are just extraordinarily frustrating, but more and more people are understanding the desperation of climate change. And so in a way, it's kind of freeing that you got nothing to lose, right? And people will do great things when there's nothing to lose. So in a way, it's a little bit uplifting for me in a weird way. So the thing, I guess, to leave all of you with for this is every problem is an opportunity. And if we look at sustainability and climate, and they're very interwoven, hard to tease them apart, this is full employment for many generations, and lots of creativity to change our system from food to waste to the replacements for plastics and even how we live. It's a wonderful opportunity, and I've heard this before. We have the opportunity to live the most meaningful lives that human beings have ever lived. And so my question to you is, do you want to be part of that and step up and exercise leadership more often? So anyway, I'll stop share.